Hey guys, so of course we just recently had YCS Richmond, so as usual I wanted to go over the most played hand traps and staples, as well as some of the tech choices in these topping lists that were available, so that it can help you prepare your deck list as you prepare for your events. And as usual, definitely go check out those discount codes for Yu-Gi-Oh! Sleeves as well as singles. Really want to highlight that Card Brawlers as well as Tier 0 games, they both have singles up for pre-orders for that new Valiant Smasher set, so definitely go check that out. Use code Hakuna5 for 5% off. Alright, so this is the actual top cut of top 32 for YCS Richmond, and this was created by the Card Launcher Store. Definitely go check them out. Really good resource for meta content. Anyways, we did have Unchained. They were the most represented deck for this event. Of course, we still have Tearlaments. Rescue Ace did not have as good showing this time around, but overall, in the 3 YCS events post Age of Overlord, Rescue Ace, they do still have the most number of YCS tops as well as regional level tops as well, and you can certainly go check out my recent meta tier list by the data video as well. Now, in terms of the decks that were actually included for this video, because we are restricted to, what deck lists were actually made publicly available, we do have 21 deck lists to work with, and this is kind of like the pie chart for that, and basically it kind of looks similar, although it does look like we're missing a few Rescue Ace lists. Now, in terms of an overview of the hand traps among these topping lists that were available, in terms of the median number in the main deck, that was actually 9 as a median number, and that is higher than last time around when I did this post YCS Indianapolis, which the median was around 7. So 9 is actually quite a high number from the times that I've been doing this from the last few years. The 7 that we saw post YCS Indy was already a higher trend than the YCS event prior to that as well. So in the side though, it is relatively the same as it's always been, which is around 6. In terms of going second board breakers, the median number that has dropped to about 3, and then as well as in the side that has also dropped to about 3. So I guess for this event, it looks like people were main decking more hand traps this time around compared to board breakers. But typically, what I see in these kind of breakdowns is that a lot of the times in the next YCS event, it kind of tends to like flip flop back and forth sometimes because people just assume they're more on hand traps and then they kind of like gear towards board breakers instead, and so there's always that kind of cyclical trend. Now, in terms of the most common hand traps among these topping lists that were publicly available, we're going to start with Droll, which is kind of an interesting surprise in a way because usually it's always Ash as number 1, and I'm just going to put Nibiru here as well because they were actually tied for first. Droll, for the most part, it is side decked if it was played, but it is obviously very good. You did have something like, let's say, for example, Mannadium has been kind of on the rise as well. Like, you really need Droll in that matchup, and to be honest with you, Droll is actually, I find at least, pretty decent against something like Rescue Ace, against Tearlaments as well as let's say Infernoble was, certainly did well at this event. Maybe the top players kind of predicted that would happen as well, and Droll can be good as long as they don't rip it with like Aqua Dolphin. So I think that, as well as Nibiru as well. I mean, you have something like, let's say, Unchained, still a good deck, and again, something like Rescue Ace, of course, Nibiru has always been known to be pretty good. Against Tearlaments, I think it's kind of like depends on the build. If they're not on Racalis because they're not on King of the Swamp stuff, then yeah, I guess Nibiru can go harder in that respect. But overall, against rogue decks as well, Droll and Nibiru are always going to be relevant against a lot of different decks. When we of course have Ash, this is just generic. You're just gonna always see this. It's good against, like let's say Labrynth. We're still seeing a good amount of those, especially with the new support in Arias from Age of Overlord. So Ash on like welcome, big welcome. It's really strong. As well as let's say Rescue Ace, I guess Ash on emergency can also go quite hard, and even against Unchained. Honestly, a lot of times I think Ash can be quite impactful against that deck as well. Of course, Branded has just completely died off, but if you do face against them, Ash is of course going to be pretty much FTK against them as well. Jokes aside, we do also have Imperm and actually Veiler. At first, Veiler has typically not seen that much play in the last little while, but nowadays I guess it's because Rescue Ace is such a dominant deck. I'm gonna assume that it's probably in there just to try to stop that turbulence from being able to set 4, which certainly can be quite devastating to go against. Of course, we do still have Dimension Shifter. We are not seeing that much of Flunder, for example, in terms of top 32 lately, but that is, of course, a deck that can optimize as well. There was actually a Kashtira list that also topped, so they're, of course, going to be on Shifter as well, but for the most part, it looks like they are not being main decked, at least. Of course, we have Bestials. Druid's Worm was more common than Magma nowadays, especially because it is better against something like Unchained, and as we saw, Unchained is not dead yet. It is still a very strong deck and kicking around. We also have DD Crow. Just basically, these represent a lot of banishing essentially, so this can also at least be impactful against something like Purrely as well, kind of like stopping like they see someone on top, and of course against Tearlaments, like and Unchained, like being able to banish is always nice, and even against something like Labrynth. I recently did a survey video on Labrynth players, and they kind of mentioned just anything that can banish their resources is pretty critical because they just don't really have an in-engine way to get those back. Next we have Phantasmate. This is something that kind of went flipped back and forth back when Unchained first kind of came into the meta. I guess right now you can pretty much see links in most meta relevant decks. I mean, right, like Rescue Ace, they go into like their kind of like Cyber's line. You have something like Unchained, a lot of links. Tearlaments, they play links. I mean, I guess Labrynth probably not, although they do have, you know, plays like Muckraker. I'm guessing they're probably playing SP, so it probably doesn't come up too much on turn 1, but at least it can potentially come up, but you're probably not siding against them. And so nonetheless, I think it's pretty good in terms of just being able to fix your hand going second. And of course, we do have Ghost Mourner. So I'm going to assume this again is also because of maybe Rescue Ace, just being able to kind of like negate that attempt to, or rather prevent them from being able to set 4. And there were actually also Ghost Sister Spooky Dogwood. That was also seen in 3 lists. I think typically they're usually seen in like decks like, let's say, Tearlaments, especially because their turns, they tend to take quite a while. So any kind of time cards definitely come up for Tearlaments. And of course, Magma was also seen in 3 lists. In terms of most common side deck staples, we're going to start with Feather Duster as usual. And to be honest with you, the next 5, they are actually all in the same order that we just saw post YCS Indianapolis. So I'm not going to go too much in detail for that. Like realistically, this is pretty straightforward. Talents and thrusts are always going to go hand in hand. I'm kind of interested if they will actually do some kind of hit to talents, just because it's such a crazy card, and I've definitely seen a lot of Twitter threads regarding that card. Evenly Lightning Storm, again, we do have Rescue Ace in the mechs as one of the best, if maybe the best deck, and just being able to clear back row, and you know, you still have Labrynth around anyway, so being able to get rid of all the back row is always really nice. We do have Call by the Grave, seeing a little bit more play than last time around. Definitely not like a generic main deck must card anymore. And of course, we unfortunately have D-Barrier. I was really hoping that we weren't going to see much of this anymore, but sadly it was still around for this event. All sided though, which is kind of interesting because we did have some Labrynth lists included as part of this video, so I guess they were not main decking it either. I guess, I mean, to be fair, maybe it's not so good against certain strategies. Obviously, Branded is also completely kind of died off, at least for now, and so D-Barrier has always gone really hard against them, but you know, for the most part, this is for that Purrely matchup, because calling Seas on them can also be very, very deadly. We also have Cashier Fenrir. Nowadays, you know, aside from that one Cashier list that did top, you know, you're not seeing much of Cashier anymore, so realistically, this kind of just serves them more as a generic board breaker that's being seen in a lot of different lists right now. We also have Xyz Encore still, again, for that, you know, like Purrely, X-Purrely Noir. It's like really hard to out for a lot of decks. It can also be used against something like, let's say, Abyss Dweller. If you're a deck that's playing like, you know, Unchained or Tearlaments, you need your Grave effects, so it can be useful against those strategies as well. And lastly, we do also have Solemn Judgment. We did have some trap decks in the topping deck list. You know, we had Labrynth. Dynamorphia was also on this as well. Really, really strong, and of course, without Red Reboot, we just won't be able to stop it. And then we have Enemy Controller, which of course came out in Ultimate Rare in the recent OTS pack. So this, I can assume, would be pretty good in like a Rescue Ace mirror by taking like the Hydrant or something. But you know what? I think nonetheless, in general, it can be a pretty good board breaker, especially if you have some, like, I don't know, some monster to spare and just being able to take your opponent's monster. Honestly, this can also come up against something like Baguska as well if you kind of die to that, just because you can just switch the Baguska's position to attack with the Enemy Controller. So that way you can actually activate some effects. You also have Herald of Abyss, kind of similar to the lines of Xyz Encore, primarily there, honestly, for just that X-Purrely Noir. We also have Lava Golem, kind of interesting that we're not seeing much Kaijus anymore. I guess that kind of makes sense. You know, we do have a Rise Heart gone now, and that's kind of like why we saw so much Kaiju play in the first place. But of course, Lava Golem, Sphere Mode, cards like that, you cannot really expect to see that in a lot of decks because it's only seen in decks that really don't need their normal summon that much. We also have Super Poly. While we did not have any branded lists in the topping cut, we did have Tearlaments, which is where most of this is coming from. And we'll actually cover one interesting Super Poly target in the Tech Choice section. And finally, we also have Anti-Spell Fragment seen in a couple of lists. Thankfully, I mean, I don't want to see this card being seeing too much play. Usually, like, Unchained is known to be to play this post side really, really strong against a lot of strategies, and hopefully this card actually gets hit on the ban list at some point. Okay, so a new addition to this video is just kind of covering some of the most common generic extra deck monsters, and this kind of came to fruition based on a comment from my last video where someone asked how often SP was played, which at that video actually was seen in every single list. This time around, SP was definitely the most played extra deck monster. No surprise, really, really expensive right now for a reason. It actually was not seen in every list, at least among the ones that were publicly available. I know at least one of those lists that were not playing SP Little Knight, it was Salamangreat, which maybe I guess makes sense, but I feel like you could probably fit it in if you could. And then the other one is actually Typhon, the Inverse Zeus. This has certainly been getting some attention lately as well. I think it's a pretty interesting card just because it can certainly provide a way to out certain monsters that your deck otherwise could not. But you know, you do have to keep in mind of its restrictions, especially if you're playing something like Kashyyyk and you have like that field spell. Your Typhon might indirectly get that attack boost and not be able to use its effects either. And speaking of Zeus, we have the Zeus Daddy himself, and so of course, you know, pretty generic. Being able to just board clear after slapping on whatever Xyz monster that you have is always nice, especially if you actually take your opponent's Xyz monster and then slap you on Zeus on top of it, so that you don't have to give that monster back at the end phase or whatever. Really useful there. We also have Nightmare Unicorn, which is interesting because originally I thought, well, you know, there's SP, like what's the need for Unicorn? And then I realized the only decks that were playing Nightmare Unicorn were actually, you know, Labrynth, Unchained, who are fiend locked a lot of the time, so Nightmare Unicorn can still have some utility there. And of course we have Barone, which, you know, is kind of weird to say, but it's a bulk card now thanks to that recent rarity reprint set. But really probably the best generic ranked, or rather synchro 10 out there, just being able to serve as that Omni Negate, but also being able to pop a card too. Lastly, in terms of some of the tech choices that we're seeing in these topping deck lists, and of course there's the Guilty Gear feed, which we'll get to shortly as a super poly target. Sangan, this one was an interesting one in an Unchained deck list. And also Purrely, not that it's a tech in itself, but more so that I noticed in, let's say for example, packs topping Infernoble list, he actually had this in the side as a cross-out target, which I thought was kind of interesting. I mean, I certainly don't know Infernoble very well, but I'm not sure how they kind of out-X Purrely Noir in engine. Certainly let me know if there are ways, but I guess maybe he really respected it, and that's why he put it in there. So in terms of Guilty Gear feed, this is certainly a card that I haven't seen before, but as a super poly target, it definitely makes sense right now because it does say 2 warrior monsters with different attributes. So if you can imagine SP Little Knight, that's a warrior, and that's a dark, that's 1. And you have, let's say, any Infernoble, you know, they're fire warriors, or even Barone, that's a wind warrior. So like really easy way to get rid of those really powerful extra deck monsters right now. And on top of that, it has an effect where it seems like it can just deal a whole lot of damage as well. And then the last tech choice, which was really interesting, was Sangan, and this was seen in the Unchained deck list by Jesse Kahn, and you can certainly check out that deck profile. Basically, he was saying how, you know, he would put this post side and he'd be able to summon this off of Tour Guide, and then when you link off the Tour Guide as well as the Sangan would trigger, and you can essentially add a hand trap, you know, a monster with 15 or less attack. In his example, he showed adding Droll, so I thought that was really cool, and maybe this is something you can try out in your Unchained deck list as you head to whatever events that you may have coming soon. And I'm sure if you're having any event to go to, you can use some new sleeves, and you can certainly use code Hakuna5 for 5% off on Dragon Shield sleeves. Anyways guys, that was it for the breakdown of the most played hand traps and staples, as well as tech choices in the YCS topping deck list from YCS Richmond. Huge thanks to all of you for watching. A big thanks to my patrons as always for supporting the channel and the continued support, and well, take care guys.